In C#, data can be given to methods as parameters. Parameters are placed inside the parentheses after the method name. We can have multiple parameters by separating them with commas. For example, the sum method takes two parameters called number1 and number2, both of type int. When we call the method, we need to provide two int values because the method requires two parameters for performing the sum operation. Okay, the values that are passed to the method are called arguments. In this case, 3 and 7 are the arguments, while number1 and number2 are the parameters. Alright, it's important to note that the method call must have the same number of arguments as there are parameters, and the arguments must be passed in the same order. Okay, these parameters can be categorized into two types, value types and reference types. Each type behaves differently inside the method. In this lecture, we'll explain both types. Hello everyone, welcome again. In C#, the behavior of value types and reference types when used as method arguments can have different results. It's important to understand these differences to write correct and efficient code. Let's start with value type parameters. Okay, as you know, value types are data types that store their values directly in their own memory space. For example, when we assign a value type variable to another variable, a copy of the value is passed to the new variable. In this example, we create an int variable x and assign it the value of 10. Then, we assign the value of x to another variable y. At this point, both x and y hold the value 10. However, when we later change the value of y to 20, the value of x remains unaffected. This is because value types are independent of each other, and changing the value of y does not affect the value of x. The same behavior applies to value type parameters. When we pass a value type variable as a method argument, a copy of the value is passed to the method. These two variables are independent. Therefore, any change made to the parameter within the method do not affect the original variable outside the method. Now, let's jump to VS Code and see this behavior in action. Okay, in the main method, we create an int variable called x and set it to 10. We then print the value of x. Now, let's define a method called changeValue. This method takes an int parameter named y. Inside the method, we change the value of y to 20 and print its value. Back in the main method, we call the changeValue method and pass the value of x as an argument. This means that the value of x is given to the changeValue method and assigned to the y parameter. Finally, we print the value of x again. Now, let's run the application. As you can see, since x and y are separate variables, when we change the value of y from 10 to 20 inside the changeValue method, the value of x remains unchanged at 10. This is how value type parameters behave in C#. Now, let's move on to reference types. Okay, as you know, reference types store a reference to the actual data in memory. When we declare a variable of a reference type, the memory allocated to that variable holds a reference to the actual data. Here, in this example, we create a person object and assign the name property to John. Then we assign person 1 to person 2. At this point, both person 1 and person 2 point to the same person object in memory, with the name value being John. Therefore, when we modify the name value of person 2 to Emma, the name value in person 1 is also changed. This behavior occurs because reference types share the same data, and any modifications made to one reference are reflected in all references to that data. The same behavior applies to reference type parameters. When we pass a reference type variable from one method to another, it doesn't create a new copy of the variable. Instead, it passes the memory address of the actual data stored in the heap. This means that any change made to the data in one variable will be reflected in other variables as well. This is because both variables are pointing to the same memory location. Now let's jump to VS Code again and see this behavior in action. Alright, inside the main method, we create an instance of the person class. Next, we set the name property of the person object to John and print it. Now, let's create a method called changeName that takes a parameter of type person. Inside this method, we change the value of the name property to Emma and print it. Okay, let's call the changeName method and pass person 1 as the argument. Then, let's print the name property of person 1 again. Okay, here's what's happening. When we create an instance of the person class, the data is stored in the heap and its memory location is stored in the person 1 variable. The initial value of the name property is an empty string because that's the default value for strings. When we change the value of the name property to John, the value in the heap is also updated to John. Next, when we pass the person1 variable as an argument to the changeName method, the memory location of the person object is stored in the person2 variable within the method stack frame. Now, both person1 and person2 are pointing to the same object. This means that if we make change to the person object using either variable, it will affect the other variable as well. Inside the changeName method, we change the name property of the person object to Emma. This means that when we print the name property of person1 again, it will display Emma. This confirms that changes made through person2 affect person1 as well. To confirm this, let's run the application. As you can see, we get the expected result. Alright, to summarize, when a method has parameters, local variables are created in the method stack frame for each parameter. If the parameter is a value type, a copy of the actual data is stored in the new variable. This variable acts independently of the variable passed as an argument, and changing it doesn't affect the original variable. On the other hand, if the parameter is a reference type, a copy of the memory location of the data is stored in the new variable. This variable and the argument variable both point to the same data, so changes in one variable affect the other. It's important to understand this behavior in programming, as it helps you better understand how your program behaves. Okay, done. See you soon.